Welcome back to the Adam Schefter Podcast and the soap opera that is known as the National Football League, because it is a soap opera. It never fails to amaze. It continues to give and provide. The things that happen in this league truly are the greatest reality show that we see. So we are going to look back and ahead at some of the events of this past week, at some of the biggest issues in the National Football League, some of the biggest storylines that are affecting the game today. And to do that, we will be joined by one of the co-hosts of the Pat McAfee Show, my friend, my colleague, Ty Schmit. He'll be along here shortly to do the weekly six-pack, where we have some excellent items planned this week. And after the six-pack, we will be joined by the Pro Football Hall of Fame defensive end, Richard Seymour, who last week was approved as a minority stakeholder in the Las Vegas Raiders franchise, along with his former Patriots teammate, Tom Brady. Everybody talked about Tom Brady. Not as many talked about Richard Seymour. So we figured we would get Richard Seymour on here to talk about him becoming a minority stakeholder in the Las Vegas Raiders. But before we get to Richard Seymour, first, we turn back to Ty Schmit, the co-host of this week's six-pack.
Shefty, good to be back with you. Another crazy week of the NFL season. You mentioned it. You know, the drama just continues to unfold. I think you could argue that this was a week of losses. That kind of was the theme of the entire weekend. With that in mind, let's get into topic number one of the six-pack. Last night, late in the fourth quarter of the Monday Night Football game between the Buccaneers and the Ravens, Chris Godwin goes down with a horrific dislocated ankle. Looks like he's going to be done for the season, and that's after already losing Mike Evans to a hamstring earlier in the night. What does the loss to Chris Godwin for what we think is going to be the rest of the season mean to the Bucs, you think? Sorry.
Well, it'll be for the rest of the season, and they haven't officially said it yet, but it would be shocking. The Ravens players that were around him on the field said, and I don't mean to be too graphic here or too vivid, but that his foot was flopping around like a fish on a sidewalk, like bad. And it's the worst thing. You don't want to see that. And it was an unfortunate injury. It was a tragic injury. And he's going to have surgery to get that repaired before he becomes a free agent. So in the short term, you lose Chris Godwin, who his numbers, I don't know if people realize this, were through the roof, Ty. Like, he had been so productive and reliable this season that, again, I just think people overlook how much he meant to the offense. If we look at the numbers of Chris Godwin after week 7, or what is this, week 7? After week 7, he was second in the NFL in receiving yards with 576. He was third in the NFL with receiving touchdowns with 5. He had the lowest drop rate of any receiver in the NFL, hadn't dropped a pass all year long, had 33 catches for first downs, the most in the NFL, had 12 explosive receptions, tied for third. The guy was performing at an incredibly high level. You lose an enormous amount of production. And he's been such a great Buccaneer for so long, his contract's up. Now, I think the opportunity will be there for him to get a deal done with Tampa, in part because of this injury. But maybe there's a team that values Chris Godwin more, which would mean that he's played his last down as a Buccaneer. But that's in question right now. So you lose a great player. You lose somebody who's so respected in the locker room. You lose somebody that's going to become a free agent. And now you lose Mike Evans through week 11 with a hamstring injury. So it's a double whammy to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. Tough blow to overcome. You wonder if the Buccaneers would make a move at the trade deadline. Still like what they have. The other receivers, Jalen McMillan, I think has a chance to be pretty good. They have Sterling Shepard, who knows Baker Mayfield from their time together at Oklahoma. They have Trey Palmer. They have some good young receivers. But Chris Godwin and Mike Evans were one of the best tandems in the NFL. One of the best. And the tandem is broken up for the rest of the season, and they'll get back Evans, hopefully, we expect. But Godwin is going to be done, and we wish him a very speedy recovery. It's just terrible to watch the whole thing. And, of course, there's the whole controversy surrounding the tackle, how the league is now reviewing it to see if it's a hip drop tackle, and they haven't called it all year long. So I think the league is looking to make some kind of example of somebody to say these are the kind of tackles we don't want. It won't surprise me if Roquan Smith gets a big fine for his tackle of Chris Godwin on Monday night.
I mean, you hate to see it. You mentioned it. I think by all reports, Chris Godwin's kind of referred to as one of the really good guys in the NFL. And the Bucks, their offense had just started rolling here too, so obviously they have playoff aspirations. It's not like, that divisional race is far from over. They're right in the thick of it, if not the favorites. So absolutely hate to see that. Let's go to topic number 2, Shefty. From one season ending injury to a wide receiver to another, 49ers just can't seem to get away from the injury bug. Brandon Aiyuk tears his ACL and his MCL. I mean, these just keep stacking up. What does this loss mean for the 49ers?
Well, there is the short-term ramifications. There's the long-term ramifications. They lose one of their most productive players, a player that they paid, $30 million a year to just in August, a guy who was instrumental in them advancing to the Super Bowl last year, a guy who made so many big plays in playoff games. And really, it's just a continuation of the whole Niners season. And so we'll see. The interesting part about it is there were some option bonus payments in his contract after this year that would have given this team some financial flexibility if it decided to shop him. And now with his knee injury, he's unshoppable. He's there. You can't get any financial flexibility from a player coming off an injury like this. So you lose the player during the year. You lose some options for potential flexibility during the offseason. And it's another big loss for a team that has just had so many of them this season. I know Deebo Samuel's out of the hospital after having fluid build up in his lungs and having pneumonia. George Kittle's got a sprained foot. Christian McCaffrey hopefully will be back after this week. They'll give him the bye week to get ready for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won't have Mike Evans or Chris Godwin in that game. And so this is just one of those years where it feels like the Niners have been healthy in other years, and they're paying the price for it this year. Almost like they made a deal with the devil. Hey, give us our health in these years to get to the Super Bowl, and then do what you want to us after. And the football gods have not cooperated this year. And the Brandon Aiyuk situation is just one of those situations where it just never seemed to be going the way that either side wanted it to go all year long. He's not in camp, can't get a deal done, finally gets a deal done, not entirely healthy, doesn't play well, drops passes, gets hurt, out for the year. I mean, that's not what anybody would have wanted on either side, correct?
No, definitely. I mean, especially coming off last year. I mean, Aiyuk, obviously they have a bunch of weapons, but Aiyuk seemed like he was really the guy that kind of unlocked their offense and let them go. He was the vertical threat, obviously, and then that opened up everything for McCaffrey and Deebo. And like you mentioned, it just from the get-go this year, it didn't seem right. He had that early drop, the touchdown in the corner of the end zone where Peyton on the Manning cast kind of went crazy and said, hey, this is why you show up in camp. This is why you don't, go to the park and catch passes from a 50-year-old guy like me. So obviously terrible for the 49ers. And you mentioned the deal with the devil. Like it does see, I mean, I think most people would just assume, hey, the 49ers are going to be there. They're going to be there in the end. But at what point do the injuries just mount up to the point where there's nothing you can do and you can't respond from it?
The only good thing for them is that nobody has run away with their division. The conference is within reach. The playoffs are within reach. And if they could just get to the playoffs, you never know. But it's just one of those years where every time it feels like they take a step forward, something else happens to be a setback for them. And it's happened all year long, all summer. So hopefully they're good enough to overcome it. We'll see if they are. Big game against the Cowboys this Sunday night. Two teams really hurting. Two teams really need a win. One of them will come out of there feeling a lot better about themselves. One of them is going to come out with a lot more questions after Sunday night.
Yeah, absolutely. Both teams seem snake bit, so we'll see who, it almost feels like a make or break game on Sunday night. Let's move to topic number 3, Shefty. Obviously, we have the two major wide receivers getting hurt in what is arguably, I think, the biggest injury news of the weekend. Deshaun Watson ruptures his Achilles. He's obviously going to be out for the year. I mean, I feel like there's just so much to say and unpack with this whole situation, but what does the loss of Deshaun Watson mean to the Browns?
Well, Wow. Like, where to even begin with this? Here's a player that they traded so much to get. Here's a player that they were going to build their franchise around. Here's a player, forget about the off the field stuff, but when you watched him on the field, he looked like he had lost some of that explosiveness, some of that twitchiness, some of that elusiveness that made him a great player in Houston. That looked like it was gone in Cleveland. Now, maybe that was the injuries prior to rupturing his Achilles. He had 2 torn ACLs, other aches and pains, but maybe that was part of it. Maybe being out of football was part of it. Maybe everything hanging over his head was a part of it. Maybe age is a part. Just, he did not look like the same guy. Okay, he tears his Achilles on Sunday. He's out for the year. And all I could think of is, number one, is the guy going to play again? Is he going to be back? What does that team do? The cap responsibilities that they have. We talked about this on your show Monday, but he carries a $72.9 million salary cap number in 2025 and a matching $72.9 million salary cap number in 2026. That's 2 years. That's basically $146 million against the cap for the Cleveland Browns. How are you supposed to field a football team, build a football team, when you've that much tied up in a player who wasn't playing well, who's out for the year, who's coming off a torn Achilles, who previously had 2 torn ACLs, who has some of the off the field questions that the league is still looking into? Like, what a mess in every which way. There's no other way around it. The Houston Texans rebuilt their franchise on the strength of that one trade, and the Cleveland Browns have fallen back to becoming the Cleveland Browns, where honestly, they have to find a quarterback that they hit on somewhere in the draft, some young guy whose total contract is going to be worth than what they're paying. It's going to be worth less than what they're paying Deshaun Watson next year. Just like the 49ers found Brock Purdy, which spared them of some of the other mistakes that they made, the Browns have to find a quarterback somewhere that's going to help them basically move forward past the Deshaun Watson day and age so that they can heal and recover as a franchise to be competitive, because they're digging out from an avalanche right now. They're buried under. And it's not to say they can't get out. They can. But it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of digging, a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of understanding. And this is a team that struggled to get some of those things in the past.
Yeah, and you mentioned it on Monday on Pat's show, Shefty. If you're a Browns fan right now, it probably seems like you're digging out of that avalanche with a spoon, and there's no end in sight. And you mentioned it. There is no other way out, right? Because his contract is untradeable, and then you met all the off the field stuff. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be trading for him anytime soon. And to be in that position where it's like, hey, we need to basically draft Brock Purdy. We need to somehow try to capture lightning in a bottle. You never want to think that a team's going to kind of just pack it up and be done with the season this early, but they're probably going to be in the top 5 to 10 in the draft next year, and hope that you hit on a quarter. It's just such a tough situation for Browns fans to be in, and that's the other thing. We're not even in November yet. It's not even Halloween yet, and we're already talking about punting the season.
Well, and let's see what whichever quarterback they use does going forward, right? Let's see if Dorian Thompson-Robinson provides a lift, or Jameis Winston provides a lift, or Bailey Zappi provides a lift, or whatever they decide to do at quarterback. Let's see if they can get anything out of these guys, and let's see if they make the offense look better than Deshaun made it look, because if that happens, that's also interesting. Because last year, they went to the playoffs on the strength of Joe Flacco's play. Joe Flacco leaves in free agency. What if they start winning or playing competitive football with one of these other guys now? That also raises a whole other set of questions. So, again, it's a tough time to be a Cleveland Browns fan, and we'll see how the organization responds to dealing with all of it.
Yeah, Good luck. If you're a Browns fan, just keep chugging along. I guess that's all you can do. Let's move to topic number 4, Shefty. We go from a nightmare situation in Cleveland to maybe a tortured fan base who is on top of the world right now. Jayden Daniels obviously gets banged up a little bit on Sunday against the Panthers, but the Commanders go out and wallop the Panthers regardless with Marcus Mariota. How long do we think Jayden Daniels is going to be out, and what does that ultimately mean for the Commanders?
Well, this is interesting, right? Because after he hurt his rib on Sunday, you could see he went down early and then it was bothering him. And then they took him out of the game and they had the game so in hand that there was no reason to put him back in. So he went through testing. We still don't know the full results of that testing. I'm sure it'll come out this week. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon for the record, and we'll see whether or not he can go. But when Dan Quinn, the Commanders head coach, says on Monday that he is week to week, somewhere along the way, week to week became the code for player is unlikely to play this week. When you hear week to week, player's status is very much in doubt for the upcoming week. There aren't many players who, when they're labeled week to week, seem to come back and play that week. And as much as they would like Jayden Daniels to come back and bounce back this year or this week, they have to take their time and they have to do the right thing. And so when his mother says or tweets out on Sunday night, he's fine is also relative. He's fine doesn't mean he's playing Sunday against the Chicago Bears. He's fine, meaning that there is no long-term damage. It's not a significant injury, but it might be significant enough to prevent him from playing in a game that the league flexed to the late afternoon slot with the hope that it would be Jayden Daniels versus Caleb Williams. And now, at the very least, Ty, that matchup is in question, if not doubt. We'll see how Jayden Daniels responds during the week. I think the team's going to be careful and smart, as it should be, and we'll see if he can make it back. But my sense would be, based on the tea leaves and early signs, he doesn't play this week. We get Marcus Mariota, and we'll see if the Commanders can move forward rolling with him.
I mean, I think that would certainly make the most sense. The Commanders are in a very advantageous position right now. Before the season, who knows what the expectations are, but now you go from, yeah, we want to see him develop, but like we're holding the reins to win this division right now. So why rush him back out there, potentially get him hurt? And I think you got to give Cliff Kingsbury a lot of credit too. You take it with a grain of salt because Carolina is what Carolina is, but Marcus Mariota came in and he looked pretty darn good against that Carolina defense regardless.
It's amazing because in speaking to some of the Commanders, they're like, man, that Panthers team, not very good. Didn't play hard, kind of gave up. I'm like, what do you think it was like in Washington last year, other years? Like, same kind of thing that Carolina is going through right now. They bring in a new coach. They bring in new assistants. They bring in a new quarterback. And when you hit on some of those things, it turns around an entire franchise. And Washington was where Carolina was. Washington made some moves that improved the franchise. Now Washington can be considered a favorite to win the NFC East, to compete in the NFC. Hard to imagine that they could get past the teams in the NFC North, but at this point, they are so far ahead of the game. We never would have thought going into week 8 that we would be talking about the Commanders winning the NFC East, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it really is crazy. So hats off to them. You mentioned the NFC North. Let's move to topic number 5, Shefty. And what you just said about Washington, bringing in a new coach, bringing in a new front office and a new quarterback and hitting on a couple of those things. Topic number 5 in the Lions. I mean, they've done all that and they are arguably the best team in the NFL right now. But Jameson Williams, who has been a, spark plug for them so far this year, turns out he's going to get suspended for 2 games. What does the Lions' loss of Jameson Williams for the next 2 games mean for them?
Well, here's the whole thing, right? He's playing this week because the suspension hasn't been announced yet. And usually when suspensions come down, they are made official when the league announces them. Eric Woodyard of ESPN, the Lions ESPN Nation reporter, does a very nice job, reported on Monday night that Jameson Williams is facing a 2-game suspension. Now, again, you have to pay attention to some of the language in there and figure out what it means, parse it out. Facing means that he's facing it and he might be appealing it, and we don't know what's going to happen with the appeal. Facing it means that the league might be making a ruling on it. Facing it means a lot of different things. But I can tell you this, as of Tuesday afternoon, as we tape this, he has not yet been suspended. Now, that's coming, I'm sure. Eric, I don't believe would be wrong. The Lions organization, I believe, is aware there's absolutely an issue. But is this an issue that's going to be put into effect next week, the week after, next month, this season? I don't know. I haven't gotten any answers yet. So I believe, to ESPN's reporting, that there's going to be a 2-game suspension. But I don't know where we are in the process right now of that 2-game suspension. And having covered and reported on any number of suspensions through the years, you have to understand the technicalities. And I was on the phone with Eric last night, walking him through some of the things, trying to get confirmation on others, just to kind of make sure that he was as buttoned up as he could be. And he was. Like, he was convinced he had everything he needed. But there's still some information here that we don't have. Like, when does this take hold? Has the appeal been heard? Is the decision final? We don't know those things just yet. And until we do, we'll wait to see when the actual discipline is handed down. I do expect it to be coming. I don't know when it is, but there are some details here that are missing from the story that are still lingering out there.
Now, I understand you maybe don't know when it is. Is this the type of thing, Shefty, you think that could extend a couple weeks? Because I would assume if the Lions can drag this thing out as long as possible and have Jameson Williams available for when they play the Packers, they would absolutely love for that to be the situation.
The Lions don't control it. It's not like they get to dictate when the suspension is served. The league makes a ruling, and when the league is ready to make a ruling and make it official and binding, he's going to serve those 2 games, whether they're against the Packers, Bears, Vikings, Jaguars, or New York. It doesn't matter. But the league hasn't gotten that. And on Tuesday, the NFL announced the suspension for Kevon Seymour of the Commanders, 6 games, for violating the NFL's performance-enhancing substances policy. That suspension was announced on Tuesday. I asked somebody, is there also a Jameson announcement today? And they said, not yet. So I don't know when that's coming. I think it might be a little bit premature. The story, the information is not premature, but when it's going to happen, that might be a little bit premature. Does that make sense, Ty?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's an interesting caveat we'll pay attention to for when that ruling actually comes down. Shefty, let's move to the 6th and final topic of the 6-pack this week. The Raiders, another one of those teams who are kind of just trying to figure out their way in the middle of the season. They lose Aidan O'Connell for what maybe 4 to 6 weeks with a fractured thumb. What does that mean for the Raiders? I mean, it feels like they've been bouncing back and forth from Gardner Minshew to Aidan O'Connell to try to get some sort of consistent quarterback play thus far this year, and they haven't been very successful.
Ty, in this broadcast, we've mentioned the Cleveland Browns having to get a quarterback. We mentioned the Carolina Panthers and how much they're struggling. And now we're talking about the Raiders. There are 3 teams right there that you could take it to the bank will be in the quarterback market in the 2025 draft. Now, I'd have to sit down and come up with the rest of the list. I know there are going to be other teams, but here are 3 teams, deadlock cinch, going to be engaged in trying to land the best quarterback they could get in the upcoming 2025 draft, whether that's Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers or Shedeur Sanders or whoever might be the top-rated quarterback. But Aidan O'Connell gets put on IR. They turn back to Gardner Minshew. They signed Desmond Ridder off the Arizona Cardinals practice squad to go on the roster. They are going to be in the quarterback market, the Raiders are. Time to get ready for that. It's coming. They wanted to get one of the quarterbacks this past year. The draft didn't fall in their favor Quarterbacks flew off the board early. By the time they made their pick, 6 quarterbacks had already been taken in the first round. The Raiders didn't get a chance to sniff a quarterback in round 1. That won't happen again next year. They're going to be in quarterback demand and quarterback land. Raiders are going quarterback. Browns are going quarterback. Panthers are going quarterback. We got a lot of teams after a lot of quarterbacks, and that will be the biggest decision the Raiders make in the offseason because they're a little bit of a crossroads. So what do they do to get some of this talent back on track? How do they find that quarterback? Well, they already got an extra 3rd-round draft pick from the Jets. Wouldn't surprise me if they get more draft capital. They're not trading Max Crosby. That would floor me, but maybe they make some more moves. But right now, one of the biggest things they could do is acquire as many picks as they can to get ready for the quarterbacks in the 2025 NFL draft, because the Vegas Raiders are going to be in that market with the Browns and the Panthers. Raiders are going to be an interesting team. They were an interesting team last week. We saw that Tom Brady was approved as a minority owner in the Raiders. And the other gentleman that was approved also was the Pro Football Hall of Famer, former Patriot defensive end, former Raiders defensive end, Richard Seymour. And like I said earlier to you, Ty, Tom Brady, we know, has gotten a lot of attention.